Hey everyone, thank you for joining today. Great to have all of you join. I know we all had overload of video meetings, video calls with families and office, and a lot of webinars. And I would try to make sure next 30 minutes or so we are going to spend together. I would have something for you, irrespective you are aspirant who wants to be a product manager sitting on couch and wondering if it's the right domain for you, whether you are a recent product manager, in that case, congratulations to you. And if you are a product manager already for a long time, you probably have already gone through some of those learnings. So I would love to know from you your experience onto those as we talk. So keep commenting and we'll discuss more on that. And anything you feel I missed, but is going to be relevant for people who are attending, and especially for those who want to be and aspire to be a product manager, just keep sharing those so that we can ensure that these 30 minutes is a great time for collective learning. Quickly about me, my name is Saurabh. I'm currently a product manager in PayPal. PayPal is a global payments company operating into 200 plus markets. Many of you would have used in your regions, in your countries you are in. And I work in consumer financial services team of PayPal, which specifically focuses on how we bring financial services to customers across the world and help them manage their money, spend their money better. In past, I was with Paytm. That's a payments company in India, with which has grown a lot in recent past. And when we discuss into startups versus global enterprises, I'll quickly touch on some of the examples of how personally I felt the experience can differ. Before that, I was into edtech and media and had experience in a couple of startups and juggled around a few ideas I was working on. On some quick facts, I'm an engineer. I think a lot of you may be an engineer, and I specifically call it out is also because engineering sometimes is being asked that is it a prerequisite to be an PM? And I would specifically highlight that no, there are really awesome PMs who have come from liberal arts to finance to so many other domains, and agnostic to what you have done previously, there are opportunities in product management and to be really successful. Yes, engineering is an enabler we all would be using all the time, irrespective of domain we are in. But I think I want to put it out there for you. And I've studied public policy and law as an interest area. I would touch on it in the later part of the presentation on why I think that there would be some areas you would want to invest on, especially for your future. For me, it was to invest on public policy and cyber law, and I'll touch on it. Why was that so? Okay, jumping right in. What we'll talk today is I'll quickly touch on the fundamental view how I see responsibility of a product manager, what a good PM should really do, and some of the learnings are from my experiences in past. Then we'll jump into top 5 learnings, especially to touch on the role of being customer focused and what it really means. How do we ensure as product managers to not get trapped into feature after feature, but not being able to make sure that we only ship features which are truly bringing value to the customers? Touching on why it is so important for a product manager to be really thorough about their product domain, the product they are managing, as well as the market they are operating into, the whole ecosystem. The fourth one would be specifically on product managers' execution ability. Like, it's great to be strategic, but you don't learn until you really ship to the market. So how do you influence? How do you prioritize your backlog? How do you innovate and ensure the features you're bringing to market are really bringing some value to the user? And last but not the least, and probably I would say the most important, is building the mindset where you are selective on what goes live, but still ensuring you are able to test and fail and learn from that and test again, but never really stop in that cycle, because there is no end of saying that, okay, my product is done and now nothing more is needed, but it's always going to be an iterative cycle. Before I start, this is one thing I generally try to share, especially with audience interested into product management, on mindfulness. A lot of you probably would have heard about mindfulness if you practice meditation. And it is simply the state of being conscious or aware about something. And I think for a product manager to be good at what they do, they really need to be aware of the circumstances and ecosystem they operate in, because it's not a role you can achieve in silo. Being aware of the factors which contribute, whether internal or external, uh, even for failure of your product is a great skill to have. That would help ensure that you know why you failed and what you really need to do differently, versus being unaware of those things can have probably much more challenges, even for your future products, if you don't learn from your past experiences. So as we start and think on responsibilities of PM, and there are great articles, great discussions on this topic, and the role has evolved a lot, because product manager is not specific to tech. A lot of you probably are into tech or maybe aspiring to be a tech PM, but product manager is a very broad role. It has been there for FMCGs, it is there for automobile companies, and various other domains. And even within tech, depending on the kind of tech company it is, the role can be very different. But I think some fundamental responsibilities will remain same. And I think that's what we need to focus on to build those skills. So even if you at some point navigate across tech companies, you are able to easily navigate because those fundamentals will remain same. There would be some exceptions to it when you are a domain expert, and how that really plays a role. We'll talk a bit about that too. Now, when I was starting, I quickly went to Google on incognito and I typed product managers are. And I was really surprised, but not surprised to see product managers are useless as the first point. And one of the reasons for that is also because product manager role is very different, like I said, in all the organizations, and hence the challenge of explaining the role. If you are a product manager, would have heard various times that why do we really need that role? And some of you would have seen this video. I'll not play the video since it might have some trouble in buffering. But the essence of the video is these two gentlemen are interviewing a person who is trying to explain the role, which is of product manager or very similar to product manager, and they're having hard time understanding that. So because the role in itself is complex, and for a lot of people it can be a generalist role where you are knowing a bit about a lot of things, you are helping people deliver things, but the role in itself can become confusing to someone. And I think one of the simple exercises I always say, if you are a product manager or you are aspiring to be a product manager, you should do is learn the role, try to explain it to, let's say, your parents, your relatives, your friends who are not aware of the role, and see, are you able to explain it in, let's say, a couple of lines? If you are, it's a great thing, because then you understand what the role truly is. And that is probably one of the things we all need to discuss more, because this role will continue evolving as more domains start coming into tech or non-tech. So to touch on responsibilities of a PM, you guys would have seen UX, tech, business, and somewhere in center you are. And that is true. But that is also not true in some senses, because there can be product manager roles which are heavy on business, which are heavy on tech, but don't touch UX, and maybe heavy on, let's say, compliance or legal. But what really remains common, and even when you remove the tech companies part of it, is you manage a product. The product can be a feature, it can be a platform, and there are customers. And the overlap on that is truly where you need to be an expert on. And hence I say that the first principle of being a PM is to be humble and to be truly a representative of the customers. The reason I specifically bring about being humble is especially because you are engaging with so many teams, and your success, your product success is dependent on a lot of those stakeholders. You need to be someone who is able to bring those teams together and work and really represent the view of customer, what they need, what their pain points is, where your product can really solve something like even an inefficiency in their life. And if you don't know your user, you may become just someone who is executing without having right data to guide you towards that. The another important part is you being able to build simple, secure, fast, and easy products. Now, your product may be solving a new need completely, or it may be solving some inefficiency a user or users in some specific region, some country, or globally are having. And also to ensure you build ethical products. We'll touch on what ethical products really means and why you as PM would be responsible for ensuring your products are not breaching the user's trust, whether it's for how you manage data, how you collect data, how you are building your experiences, and you're not discriminating among users. And that should remain as core part of your product management philosophy. You definitely need to be aware and strong about how your market is, how your competitors are doing, what they are planning to do, and what are the factors, whether internal or external, are going to affect you. So, internal factors can be what your company is planning to launch, where your company's directions are going to be, where the investments are going to be. External factors can be government is bringing new regulations that are going to affect your product. uh, Global companies are going to enter, the investments which are coming into the market versus not coming into the market, because even if your product is sensational, that can have an impact on whether your product will succeed or not. Fourth is on the execution side of it, how you are able to use those customer inputs you learned, bring that into ideation, collaborate with your design partners, your sales, your BD, your compliance, your legal partners, and prioritize those features and capabilities to meet those user needs and have them shipped. And once you have them shipped, you need to have continuous investment onto learning about the feedback you are getting, because let's say you shipped something and you're not able to get in touch with user through various means, and we'll talk a bit about that. That information is the only way for you to continue that iteration and make that product better. If you for some reason ship something and jump to the next big thing and forget about the previous piece, that product is bound to fail eventually, because there would be additional user needs which will keep coming, and hence the need for continuous iteration. And last part is probably, which is part of responsibility of a PM, is specifically being a good product strategist. Now, the amount of time you invest onto product strategy may vary depending on your role, and may depend on the size of the company. So, for example, if you are in a small startup, you may be going very broad. You would have opportunity to work on multiple things, but it depends how depth you are probably able to invest into it. And in strategy, you would really have to have the deep knowledge of factors and levers which can influence that, versus in a bigger company, if you are at a senior role, you would be investing a lot more time into strategy and planning versus just the execution portion of it. So again, both are important, but irrespective of the level you are on, always ensure you invest good amount of time onto user study, onto product strategy, and of course on product execution. Okay, moving forward, we'll start with the first and probably the most important thing you need to do. And again, this is easier said than being done. Being super customer focused, we can say that is something you would listen to some customers, you would do that, but you really cannot do this job if you sit in your office chair. And right now, if you see, we all are working from home. We all are limited in terms of being physically being able to go and meet people, but that also should not restrict us from not being customer focused and listening to them. And a lot of companies are setting up great examples, and I think when I see at PayPal, we are investing a lot on how we can still engage with the communication things we have available to still be in touch with customer as we were 6 months back. And that is essential for you to think, irrespective of the environmental scenarios or global scenarios shape up, we still need to keep that focus. And that data can come from so many different sources. It can be something which previously we were doing, like usability tests, where you invite customers, where you show them prototypes, you learn from it. It can be quantitative surveys you do. You engage with a lot of users. It can be qualitative user interviews, where you go to their city or country or home and talk to them and just get to know them. Or it can be you just observing how people are reacting to your product on social media, on internet in general. What are the sentiment of those comments? And even same things for your competitors. So if you are in a space of, let's say, B2B SaaS product, how are people reacting to your competitors too? Are they happy with it? They are unhappy with it? Are they sharing feedback? Are those feedbacks valid for your product too? How do you really incorporate? Having that view, both actively and passively, is super helpful. And last is on predictive data analytics. When you have good amount of data, you would be able to use that to predict the user behavior, to take decisions which can help user have a good experience in that sense. And that's where you see what you see on, let's say, your Instagram feed is dependent on your behavior. But again, that is an area where you need to be also very sensitive on what data you use to generate those insights. Insights are great till the time we have taken consent from the user. The user is aware and they still have control if they want to be part of recommended suggestions you are providing, or they would want to opt out of that. So again, collect information about user, about what they are saying from various sources, but also be cognizant that you don't breach into an area where you are using user data without their consent, because that would ensure that you never lose the trust of the user and are always flying in the safe zone. Now, as we think about it, and you would be observing a lot of companies out there, a lot of companies might have focused sales driven growth or a marketing driven growth or completely product driven growth, where you have never seen ads of those products, but those products are already having very high penetration into the user segment. And that's where the role of product manager comes in, that can you as a product manager have a product led strategy? Not saying at all that you should not use your sales team well, you don't need to have a marketing team, but can your product have strong enough value propositions which can make your users your mouthpiece? We'll touch on the user journey and how you acquire new users, but your product needs to be strong enough to create those viralities, because those become the enablers for your marketing teams to really take that product experience, product communication to next level. So one exercise you can do, starting today or you're already doing, is when you look at products, whether starting up, whether established products, see what really made them successful. What were the things which made them famous, made them grow exponentially? And were they driven by the product viral loop? Were they driven by a marketing viral loop? Was that a sales thing? And that would really help you define that what different that product did to stand out from their competitors. Jumping on to learning two, on how do you avoid the feature factory trap. And if you are a product manager, you probably have been into that at some or the other point. If you are aspiring to be a PM, always be conscious on the learnings you had from customer is what should dictate what features you are going to build. And I'm not saying don't build if your boss asks you something, but have the conscious efforts to really validate those things, because that is going to add super amount of value for you and going to ensure that not everything you hear about is supposed to be built and you're able to prioritize it right. We will discuss quickly on some prioritization frameworks you can use, but any framework you use, you need to make sure you don't just build features for heck of building the features. And that comes to the point that how do you invest time into identifying features which can bring more customer value than just the number of features which you would offer to the customers? So investing time onto the strategy, the market knowledge you would have, having the behavioral understanding of what user really wants, because let's say when you're talking to the user, the problem user is describing maybe something else and the solution they think maybe something else, but what they really need is something you need to really break down those problem statements to come up with the answer. And that's the exercise that you see over here is the remote. For example, there were remotes we were using in past which had a lot of buttons, but now we have better remotes, maybe because of evolved technology and so many other factors, and how that optimization can happen. So I think in concise way, look at what truly the problem of customer is, not building independent ad hoc features because they would really not solve, but really abstracting that complexity out and building something which can really scale, but not freak the user out. And this basically touches on the same thing. Probably a lot of you read Dilbert and you would have seen this on having too many feature requirements, and anything that comes to your mind, you are continuously putting it over there when the feedback even comes in complexity, in easy to use. But what you really need to also ensure is you have a thought backlog, but you really have a prioritized backlog which needs to be done. Anything which is something you have heard has come in as a feedback, if it is not matured, you probably need to manage it separately. So if you are a PM, one good exercise always is to do is to look at your backlog and just see how many of those are just thought dumps versus are actually discussed and prioritized topics you would want to really take up in future. If they are not, then move it to some other space so that you really have a clear view on what you want to do next. Talking about the learning three, specifically on product and market fit, on how you really make sure you are benchmarking your market and competitor very well. Like I said, as a PM, you need to be an expert of that domain. So for example, if you are operating into fintech, you need to know, if you are a startup, which are the bigger players you are competing against. If you are a bigger company, you need to know which all startups are really bringing the innovation into the market, and how would you really compete with them in short term or long term. And also knowing what factors really affect you as a fintech company. So let's say if you are starting up, do you know what regulations you're going to be falling into whenever you're launching a new product? If you're a bigger company, you are investing a lot of time and energy onto uh, regulatory needs, on reporting, on auditing and compliance. Knowing which thing you would want to invest on and knowing what factors may affect it, because it is not just about finding the right idea and building it with engineering and shipping it out to people. There are hundreds of factors outside which are going to influence, and you would only be able to identify them early on if you understand that market and that topic very well. Now, like I said, there are so many frameworks. You can choose what really fits you and your company. You may have some internally designed frameworks, but if you don't, the first step to probably evaluate is always from existing frameworks, because they have already been matured. A lot of people who may be listening to you have already used in past, so you don't need to really structure that framework out for everyone every time. But leave apart which framework this is, but focus on what are the threats for a new entrant, that how easy it is to set up a business. You need to be aware to identify the needs you need to fulfill in order to be successful. If let's say it's a very competitive space, how much bargain power the customer has. So let's say it's an ecosystem where there are a lot of companies and you are a PM who is going to launch one more product over there. You need to see that if customers have a lot of buying power and have a lot of bargain power, what you can really offer to stand out in front of them, and also what bargaining power you would have as a product offering. Are you bringing something unique which would stand out for the user and they would want to lean on towards you compared to your competitor, versus what can make them lean towards your competitor and not you? And you need to be able to know those things well in advance before you define your product requirements, for example. What is the intensity of competitive rivalry? So, like I said, let's say a market where there are a lot of competitors, global companies entering in, lots of startups over there, lots of VC money being burned. So, if you see, let's say APAC or LATAM markets, a lot of big companies are entering over there and they are pumping hundreds of millions of dollars, doing a lot of rewards, a lot of cashback. Now, in that market, in a lot of scenarios, customers may not incline to the best product out there, and they may be taking decisions which are financially rewarding for them. But that can be a short term thing, though it would help that company gain that user base and they might be able to retain them. So if you're operating into that market and you are into that similar cash burning phase, see how your product can bring that additional, that two step ahead value, which can make user to really keep your app, keep your product account, and not just do that one transaction where you are rewarding it, not just refer friends because you're giving a lot of money out for that step. But the retention part is probably the most tricky when you're operating into a competitive intensive market. So depending on whether you are a startup or a big company, whether your market is VC money heavy or marketing investment heavy, and what competitors truly are there, have that strategy in place before you jump into actual development of that feature. Now, like I said, the market maturity and market strategy would be defined by what stage your product is in. So if you are a new startup, you really need to identify your audience. And innovators is generally the term used for that, that how do you identify those high risk taking individuals who are okay to test your innovation and buy that product. And that market size is small, because in initial time, your product may be costly. Not a lot of people may know your product, but you need to identify that bunch of people who are aware, who are okay to take slightly higher risk on a new product, and give them a really great experience, because those are probably going to be your true market penetration voices, because they would talk about it, positive or negative, and their positive voices will go a long way compared to even your marketing campaigns in some senses. And if you have those positive voices vouching for you, entering the growth phase with early adopters would become much easy, because early adopters are still people who are okay to take the risk with an emerging product, but they would need some confidence because some other people are already talking about it. So focus a lot on that initial bunch of people. If you're launching a new startup, if you're a new product manager, how you acquire those first 1,000 users, that first 100,000 users, because that is going to impact the scale of what you want to build. And again, that also means that if you're working for a company which, let's say, has 100 million users, getting a million users on a feature is not really going to be a big deal, because you have so many people coming onto your app or website every day. 1% penetration, yes, absolute number 1 million is awesome, but is it good enough compared to your company scale? And that is what you need to define, that how big your innovator segment has to be, who are going to adapt that new feature, how big your mature phase of that product has to be. Should 70-80% of your daily active users be using that? Should 100% be using that? Or is it a focused product which only gets rolled out to a set of users? Defining these buckets and how you want to progress towards this is very important. And if you are a product manager in a bigger company, you would notice that a lot of products might be into maturity or saturation phase, which means you would maintain an existing product, but would not be innovating very often onto that. You would do improvements, you would do performance improvements, and so many other things. But the chances of making drastic improvements like complete design overhaul or something like that, maybe on a lower percentage possibility. And that is what you need to really identify: what is the status of that product maturity and market maturity, and which KPIs you are really progressing towards. Now, coming to the fourth learning, which is specifically on how, as a product manager, you are becoming better at execution. Like, the three things we spoke are great for you to know the market, for you to be really customer focused, and for you to prepare that product plan and strategy and everything. But that all is just on piece of paper until you really ship that. And that is where the true skill of you as a product manager come into picture. And especially for when you're starting, you are focusing a lot on delivery. The expectations would be high on execution from you. How you are able to partner with people, and again, that is an essence we all need to remember, that you are operating with people. Your people skills are going to play into action over here too. So how do you influence those various stakeholders? And that can depend on scale of company again. If you are a smaller setup where there are limited number of people you need to deal with, you can easily get things resolved, because let's say it's 10 people sitting in a garage somewhere, and you can make things move faster, versus in a bigger company where there are a lot of processes and a lot of stakeholder management has to happen. It's your job to ensure you have right product message and right way to prioritize things. And that becomes one of the essential part. Just like we discussed about, can you define what a product manager do to your parents or to your friends and family who have no idea about what product manager is, in 2 lines? The same thing applies, that in 1 line, can you really explain what your product is? And do an exercise with, if you are a PM or if you are even working on a startup, talk to people who are working for you or interning for you to define the product they are working on in 1 line, and just observe that what their definition is. Is it the same which you want them to learn and propagate? Is it dependent on the domain they work in and the KPIs they are working on? So let's say finance would have a different view, operations would have a different view, your marketing would have a different view. And the challenge, if you don't have a good definition of product and the value props, is customers also fail to understand that or misinterpret it. So as a product manager, when you're prioritizing things, when you're ideating, one of your primary goal is also to educate everyone about the product on a common scale, so that everyone understand that product. But then they may have their own KPIs, that marketing wants to bring in more customers, operations want to ensure any customer escalation is addressed and you convert them into happy customer even if they had a bad experience. Legal wants to ensure you are never penalized or you don't breach any let's say legal requirements, what space you operate into. Your leadership may want to know, are you really meeting the goals of that product or not? And your customer in turn would know what your product really brings them as a value and why they need to be inclining towards that. So first step, start with defining your product right, what it is meant to do, what are the ways you would measure it, and what is the clear expectation from each of the stakeholder you are going to work with. And that's why knowing what to build is the backbone. So like we discussed, all the information you collect from user research, from market knowledge, from working with your stakeholders, that brings the overall backlog, product backlog, opportunity backlog, various words different teams or companies would use. But that is where you need to use right frameworks to say that, okay, now I know I need to build these 10 things over the next 6 months. How do I do that, and which one should I pick first? You would have data on what value they bring, how much the cost of building those would be. Is it going to be legally complex or not complex? Is it going to drive revenue or engagement? And all those factors would dictate which one do you want to pick first and what your company's priority is. And that priority is really important to know. And you need to know, if you are in a startup, is your company focusing more on acquisition of users? If they are focusing, or you are focusing on revenue? If you are a bigger company, what portion of responsibility you would have in ensuring that, other pieces you are working with, or other features which are coupled together, are you working towards the same KPI, or people are running in different directions? And that's where your skills come into picture to bring all of that cohesively together without causing friction among those teams. So use various models, and two of these I'm sharing with you guys today are just for example. But like I said before, use a framework which works for your company. You define and redefine these terminologies based on the market you operate into, but have some frameworks which can bring objectivity to your backlog. Because the challenge is, you don't want your backlog to become opinionated by personalities. It would happen, but what you want to reduce is, your backlog can be read objectively. And if you even take it to your leadership, they are able to see that, okay, these are the factors uh, which they have measured each of this item on. And I know this is the score. Now, if I have to compare between A, B, and C, these are the pros and cons, and this is why A should be, let's say, a higher priority. So in RBCE, when you evaluate each of those feature item, each of those backlog items into risk, which is there in the product, the value that product brings to the customer, the cost of that product, let's say to market or otherwise, an effort needed to build that, let's say engineering effort or architectural effort or data management effort, and what are the right things to prioritize versus what are the right things you should investigate, which are very high value but the cost and effort is high, versus things which have low value and high risk. How do you avoid those ones? So use the framework, modulate it based on your company requirement, and explore other frameworks which are out there. And similarly, RICE model talks about the reach of your product, the impact of your product, how confident you are about it, and how much effort is needed. And you would notice that some of these can be subjective. So, for example, the reach is a projection that you're projecting that it will drive this much DAU, this much MAU, this much YAU, or is it going to drive $10 per customer per month? Same for impact. You are making a judgment call that what would be the impact it will bring and how much confident you are about it. And same is for effort. Your engineering teams, when you're working with them, always work on identifying what is going to be the sizing for it. And that can be X number of dev days, or per sprint, depending on the sprint duration of a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks your company follows. Using this data, you are able to find a score which is objective enough for you to compare that A versus B versus C, and make modulations in how you measure and give those scorings, so that that score can become the output of all the internal external factors combined together and helps you prioritize. So then if you have your whole backlog prioritized with any of these frameworks, you would know the highest score goes to feature A, that's what you need to ship. And you know that when it is done, you would have to move to B. But in the meanwhile, if the market dynamics or your company dynamics are changing, some of this factor or factors may change, and that would lower or higher up the score of something. And that's how your backlog would always remain up to date. That if C became more prioritized than B in the meanwhile when you were developing A, that score should be your reference. That even if it's someone else taking up your role, it's changing priorities, you have a lot of objectivity into the process. And as you build things, comes the probably the most important learning as a product manager on having the mindset to test and being open to fail, being open to learn from it, and having the courage to go back again in the market and test. Like I said, the true test of your product only happens when you launch, and anything before that is on paper. It must be, you know, great to build that amazing plan, but till the time that plan is not in execution, you really don't know if it is going to succeed or not. So have the right approach on, how much you want to test, at what level of maturity you would want to test. uh, you know a lot of learning would actually come when you go into market and your customers start sharing feedback, and those initial feedbacks are very powerful. Like I said, the early people who adopt your product are generally people who are okay to experiment and are also willing to share with you what went good or what went wrong. They may be using because they are just curious people. They may be using because the product you launched is actually fitting into the necessity they had, and that's why they want that product to also be better. And you would find people who would be willing to talk to you, willing to write app reviews for you, willing to fill in your survey forms for you and help have that product better without any incentives, direct incentives too. So focus on that part, and that's why I said in the beginning that product development is a continuous cycle. You would not hit a phase where you would say, okay, my product is done. Now I would just move to something else and I don't need to bother about this. So be very clear that is just not a position you should ever become complacent in. Even if you are jumping onto, let's say, new shiny thing, have the feedback loop really built in very well. Now, the feedback loop is you have right analytics implementation in place. What you built is being measured right. So you know how many customers are using your product, landing on those pages, why they are coming over there, where they are going after that, if they are dropping, why they are dropping, and so many insights you would actually find from that data. And keep talking to customers in that meanwhile. If they are writing you reviews, you should read them, because someone who is taking up effort to write you a review must have had some good experience or some bad experience, and you don't want to miss out on that. So have a curious eye to keep measuring, keep learning from it, and keep building, uh, keep improving that product. And also notice the products you use regularly, how often they are really also improving. Because if you are a product aspirant, one thing you need to know is that would also tell you how serious that company is to improve their products and how much importance that really takes for them. So let's say if you use 10 apps on daily basis, see how often they update their features, and go to their app store and play store and read their release notes, that what are they really updating. Are they doing performance fixes? Are they fixing bugs? Are they launching new features very regularly? Are they changing designs? Like, where the changes are happening and what reasons, possibly from your understanding of that company, they are doing. And if you are applying for a PM role, I think having all this information about that company, what they have changed in last, let's say, 1 year, let's say they did 20 releases on App Store and Play Store, which direction they are going, I think is the probably the best way you can be prepared for that interview. And the interviewers would always appreciate your in-depth knowledge of understanding that company, because that also reflects your passion to be interested to join that company. So irrespective you are an interview aspirant or not, or just operating into that domain, do this exercise. I can vouch on this that just having that regularity of knowing what that company is launching, what they are putting in release notes, how creative they are about their experiences, and listening to customers, what people are writing in their reviews, would give you so much information that you probably don't need to read how to crack an interview kind of articles. Now, as we conclude, I'll just quickly touch on the role, which is always changing, and you being able to take the driver's seat and navigating what is right for you. And PM has multiple roles. Like I said, there are product managers who would focus on experiences. There are product managers who would focus on the platform. Some may take the generalist role for long term, versus some may want to become a domain expertise like compliance expert or GDPR expert or a legal expert. And some may want to be into startups. And those are people who are okay to embrace that chaos and grow into that. Some are okay with hyper growth companies where you are really shipping fast and speed is going to be a key factor over there. Doing things very diligently is very important in those scenarios, versus in global enterprises where the speed of execution may be lower, but then you are expected to go in depth of things and be very prepared to answer even the nitty-gritty details of the things. So I think as you compare the type of companies, also have the model in mind that what your priorities are. Are you someone who needs structure? Are you someone who likes chaos in the first place? And those factors actually would help you decide, along with what is, let's say, in 2 to 3 years you would want to do. If you are an architect, if you're a machine learning aspirant, if you are someone who really loves talking to customer and build simple experiences, that would help you decide if you would want to go for experience focused role or a platform focused role, and what level of company you want to go in. Regarding the generalist versus domain expert role, if you are a product manager, keep adding in the comments too that which side you really focus on and why you chose that domain, or you didn't choose it but it just happened over a period of time. Because I think that is a conscious decision when you are 5 years, 7 years in the experience. Till that time, a lot of us would be working into generalist role. You would make a choice that do you want to be an expert of a domain, or would you want to be generalist who is managing multiple blocks of the product development cycle. And last part is on being able to learn those skills, because when you make that thought about what you want to be in 3 years and would you want to continue being a great generalist versus a domain expert, learning new skills is going to come very handy. And if you recall, when I was starting up in my introduction, I mentioned about my interest for public policy and cyber law. That was specifically because I was interested into those domains. Now, they don't have any short-term returns for me as a product manager. They do give me value, because knowing about cyber law and internet law and data protection law does give me an understanding on how my product and experiences would be affected by that, especially because I work in a payments company. PayPal is probably one of the most serious companies I know about, customer consent and data. And it becomes a primary responsibility for you as a product manager to be very conscious of, being transparent with customers and being very customer focused. So irrespective of that, identify right skills, whether you want to learn more about design, whether you want to learn more about, let's say, behavioral psychology, or if you're building products into finance or some specific sector, do you want to learn about economics? So any of these factors which impact you, have a point to learn those things at a very regular pace, and keep refining that based on how your goals are changing. Now, concluding with some implicit asks, like I mentioned to you, that we may not hear a lot of times. And again, you guys would be hearing and thinking about these topics of product management a lot, but I don't know how often we talk about some of these fundamental principles. But as you operate as a product manager, be very sure that you take security as your first principle of operations. Don't build products where users don't feel secure, because eventually they would leave your product. And if you fall into risks of their data leaks, they would lose trust on you, and you don't want to consciously ignore this topic. On data privacy, you being meeting the requirements of how you collect data, how you manage data, not because your law is pushing you to do, but genuinely because you want to give that control and that ability to your customers. And doing that, not for the law, but for the customer, would actually give you a better lens to look at user privacy than what you would just if you need to meet the law. Accessibility. People who need accessibility settings, build your apps right. Use the right color combinations, acknowledge their problems. Uh, I know in one of the sessions, someone told me that, it's 1% of my audience. Do I really want to be investing so much time onto it? But again, if you don't, you are being discriminatory. You are not catering to the users just because your KPI is different. You don't want to build products which are not inclusive. So take conscious efforts also to remove your biases, because many of us come from different culture. We have some prejudices. We are all overcoming over them. And as product managers, it's our fundamental responsibility to also look at, we don't build things which are influenced by our cultural bias or religious bias or political bias or gender bias, and becomes discriminatory to any of the communities. So take conscious efforts. It's okay to do mistakes, but make it a point to continuously learn about it. There are a lot of discussions happening on this topic right now. So as a PM, as an aspiring PM, definitely read more on this and adapt these practices into your product development life cycle. And for aspiring PMs, not to threaten you, but something you need to be aware that as a PM, being a PM can be a lonely job, and you need to be consciously including a lot of people, even when they are sharing their sorrow, their challenges with you. You may gulp up your challenges, but still be there for them to just support them all together in the journey. And people who are PM, they probably can already feel these experiences into their journey. That's it from my side. But this is an ongoing conversation. Anything I can help you, reach out to me on email or LinkedIn or on Twitter. And any things you feel I missed, which are important for a product manager, drop me a message. I would make sure that I also learn from that. I take your feedback, and I'll work towards improving that as we continue this conversation. But yeah, thank you so much for taking our time and joining me for this. Let's stay connected, and yeah, we'll continue the conversation. Thank you, everyone.